April 10, 1912, Southampton, England. The RMS Titanic sat at dock, the largest moving object ever created by human hands, 11 stories tall, 882 feet long, 46,000 tons of steel, luxury and ambition. Crowds gathered to witness its departure, but few noticed the unmarked cargo being loaded through a side entrance in the early morning hours before dawn. Third Officer Herbert Pittman supervised the loading. He'd been with White Star Line for 6 years, trusted, discreet, and thoroughly unimaginative, perfect for handling sensitive cargo. 4 wooden crates, each approximately 3 feet square, were brought aboard under heavy guard. The manifest listed them as registered mail and valuables. Standard shipping language, deliberately vague. Pittman didn't ask questions. In 1912, wealthy passengers frequently transported valuables aboard luxury liners: jewelry, artwork, bonds, currency. The Titanic's hull contained a reinforced cargo hold specifically designed for high-value items. What made these particular crates unusual wasn't their existence, but their escort. 8 men, not crew members, stayed with the crates from dock to storage. They wore ordinary clothes, but moved with military precision. When the crates were secured, the men disembarked immediately, disappearing into Southampton's morning crowds. What was in those crates? Official records are maddeningly incomplete. White Star Line's cargo manifest listed miscellaneous valuables worth approximately £150,000 insured value. In 1912, that was enormous, equivalent to roughly $18 million today. But insured value often represented a fraction of actual worth, particularly for items whose true value owners preferred keeping private. Thomas Andrews, Titanic's designer, knew about the crates. He'd personally inspected the cargo hold's arrangement 3 days before sailing. Andrews was obsessive about weight distribution. A ship Titanic's size required precise balance. Heavy cargo in the wrong location could affect stability, especially during rough seas. Andrews noted the crate's placement in his private journal. Forward hold, starboard side, secured to deck with reinforced chains. Unusual weight for size. Captain Smith informed. Captain Edward Smith, White Star Line's most senior commander, was making his final voyage before retirement. At 62 years old, Smith had commanded ships for 38 years without serious incident. He was cautious, experienced, and trusted by the company's wealthiest clients. Smith personally signed off on all high-value cargo. His signature appears on the manifest beneath those 4 mysterious crates. But Smith made an unusual decision. He assigned 2 crew members to guard the cargo hold throughout the voyage. This wasn't standard procedure. Valuable cargo was locked and sealed. Guards weren't typically necessary, yet Smith posted Frederick Barrett and Arthur John Priest on 4-hour rotating shifts, instructing them to prevent unauthorized access to the forward hold. What did Smith know that concerned him enough to assign guards? The answer might lie with John Jacob Astor, the wealthiest passenger aboard. Astor was worth approximately $87 million in 1912, equivalent to over $2 billion today. He'd spent the previous year traveling Europe and Egypt with his 18-year-old wife, Madeline, purchasing antiquities, artwork, and precious items. Astor's luggage included trunks of jewelry, rare books, and allegedly a collection of ancient Egyptian artifacts, purchased from private dealers in Cairo. But Astor wasn't traveling alone in terms of wealth. Benjamin Guggenheim, copper mining magnate, was aboard with his mistress. Guggenheim's family controlled much of America's metal industry. His personal worth exceeded $10 million. Isidor Straus, owner of Macy's department store, traveled with his wife Ida. The Strausses were worth approximately $3 million. Margaret Molly Brown, despite her later unsinkable nickname, was merely comfortably wealthy at $2 million, modest compared to fellow first-class passengers. These millionaires carried their wealth in various forms. Currency was impractical and risky. Instead, they transported jewelry, bearer bonds, stock certificates, and letters of credit. But rumors persisted about something else. Something that multiple passengers allegedly knew about but discussed only in whispers. Gold, not jewelry. Not coins, gold bars. Refined, stamped, transportable bullion. The kind governments and central banks moved between nations. The kind that didn't appear on public manifests because its movement could affect currency markets. The kind that, if 5 tons of it was aboard Titanic, would be worth approximately £1 million in 1912, worth over $350 million today. But why would anyone transport 5 tons of gold on a passenger liner? The answer lay in the complex financial situation of early 20th century international banking. Gold was the foundation of all major currencies. Countries maintained reserves backing their paper money with physical gold. When gold moved between nations, currency values shifted. Banks and governments preferred discretion. In early 1912, the United States was expanding its gold reserves. The Federal Reserve didn't exist, yet it would be created the following year. Private banks managed most international currency transactions. J.P. Morgan's bank was the most powerful, essentially functioning as America's central bank. Morgan had extensive interests in White Star Line, Titanic's owner. Morgan was supposed to sail on Titanic's maiden voyage but cancelled at the last moment, claiming illness. Was that coincidence? Or did Morgan know something? Some researchers believe Morgan arranged for gold to be transported on Titanic as part of a complex financial transaction between British and American banks. The gold would arrive in New York, be deposited in Morgan's vaults, and serve as backing for loans supporting American industrial expansion. The transaction needed to be private because public knowledge of such a large gold movement could trigger financial speculation. But there's another theory, darker, more conspiratorial. What if the gold wasn't legitimate cargo at all? What if it was being smuggled? In 1912, various governments were preparing for what would become World War I arms dealers. Intelligence services and political movements needed untraceable funding. Gold was perfect. No serial numbers. No ownership records. Completely anonymous. If someone wanted to finance secret operations, gold bullion was the ideal currency. One passenger certainly had the connections for such operations. Major Archibald, but military aide to President William Howard Taft, was returning to Washington after a secret diplomatic mission in Europe. Butt's official purpose was vacation. But military aides to the president didn't take casual vacations during international tensions, but had met with British military officials, French diplomats, and German bankers during his holiday. What was discussed? Official records are silent, but had access to Titanic's cargo areas. As a military officer and presidential representative, he possessed credentials opening most doors. Did but know about the gold. Was he perhaps supervising its transport? His cabin was first class. Cabin bay, 38, unusually close to the forward cargo hold's access point. Convenient for someone monitoring valuable shipment, the Titanic departed Southampton at noon, April 10th. Crowds cheered. Bands played. Photographers captured the moment. But in the cargo hold, secured to deck by heavy chains, 4 wooden crates sat silent and immovable. Guards stood watch. Captain Smith checked their status twice during the first day at sea. Thomas Andrews visited the hold once, ensuring everything remained properly secured. The ship made 2 more stops. Cherbourg, France, then Queenstown, Ireland. More passengers boarded, more cargo loaded. But those 4 crates never moved. They sat in darkness, surrounded by mail sacks, luggage, and ordinary cargo. 5 tons of metal, worth more than most people earned in 10 lifetimes. Hidden in plain sight. Documented but not explained. Secure but increasingly vulnerable as Titanic steamed west toward an appointment with an iceberg. On April 11th, 2 days after departure, something unusual happened. A passenger reported seeing men in the cargo hold who weren't crew members. The passenger, a businessman named Edgar Meyer, was exploring the ship when he got lost searching for the smoking room. He descended stairs meant for crew only and found himself near the forward hold. The door was open. Inside, he saw 2 men examining papers by lantern light. They weren't wearing crew uniforms. When they noticed Meyer, they quickly closed the door. Meyer reported the incident to a steward, who dismissed it as confusion. Perhaps Meyer had seen engineers inspecting cargo security. Perhaps the men were postal workers sorting mail. Meyer accepted the explanation, but later told his wife the men seemed too well dressed for crew, and they'd appeared startled to be discovered, like people caught doing something they shouldn't. Was Meyer's sighting connected to the mysterious crates? Were people checking on them, ensuring their security? Or was something more sinister occurring? If gold was aboard, and if certain parties knew about it, might they have planted associates among the passengers or crew to monitor it? These questions seemed irrelevant as Titanic continued its maiden voyage. The ship was performing beautifully. Speed was excellent. Weather was calm. Passengers were delighted. The onboard experience exceeded expectations. Luxury, service, food, entertainment, everything was perfect. This was the future of ocean travel. Fast, comfortable, safe. But in the North Atlantic, unseasonably warm weather was pushing icebergs further south than usual. On April 14th, Titanic received 6 ice warnings from other ships. Captain Smith altered course slightly southward but maintained speed. Titanic could navigate around ice. The ship was unsinkable. Multiple watertight compartments. Advanced design. State-of-the-art construction. Even if damaged, Titanic could survive. At 11:40 p.m., April 14th, Lookout Frederick Fleet spotted something ahead. Dark shape, massive, moving slowly. He rang the warning bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge. Iceberg right ahead. First Officer William Murdoch ordered engines reversed and the ship turned hard to starboard. Too late. The iceberg struck Titanic's starboard side, buckling plates below the waterline. The collision was almost gentle. A slight shuddering. A scraping sound. Many passengers didn't even wake. But below decks, water was pouring in. 6 forward compartments were flooding. Thomas Andrews immediately understood. Titanic could survive for flooded compartments. Not 6. The ship was doomed. 2.5 hours until it sank completely, and in the forward cargo hold, now rapidly filling with icy seawater. 4 wooden crates sat chained to the deck. 5 tons of gold, if the rumors were true, worth a fortune, inaccessible, about to sink 2.5 miles to the ocean floor, along with 1,500 passengers and crew who would never see morning. The first-class passenger list of the RMS Titanic read like a directory of the world's elite. Combined wealth exceeding $500 million. Industrial banking families. Old money aristocrats. Self-made millionaires, each one traveling with possessions that reflected their status. Jewelry worth small fortunes. Negotiable securities. Letters of credit. Art collections. But the true extent of wealth aboard Titanic has never been fully documented, because wealthy people in 1912 had every reason to keep their assets private. John Jacob Astor sat in the first-class smoking room on April 11th, 2 days into the voyage, discussing business with fellow millionaires. At 47 years old, Astor was America's richest man. His fortune derived from Manhattan. Real estate. His great-grandfather had purchased vast tracts of what became New York City for trivial amounts. Astor also invested in hotels, including the Waldorf Astoria, and various technological ventures. He'd even written a science fiction novel, but Astor's recent activities were more controversial. His divorce and remarriage to the 18-year-old Madeline had scandalized New York society. To escape the gossip, Astor took his young bride on an extended European and Egyptian tour. He spent lavishly collecting antiquities, jewelry, and rare items. His purchases included an ancient Egyptian necklace allegedly worth $100,000, medieval manuscripts, Roman coins, and a collection of precious stones acquired from dealers in Cairo and Paris. These items traveled in Astor's personal luggage, stored in his cabin suite. But Astor also arranged for several crates to be shipped separately through Titanic's cargo hold. The manifest listed personal effects and household items, standard language for wealthy passengers who didn't want to itemize valuable possessions publicly. Astor's personal valet, Victor Robbins, supervised the cargo loading in Southampton. Robbins was questioned years later about what those crates contained. He died in 1952 without ever providing a clear answer, saying only that Mr. Astor's affairs were his own business. Benjamin Guggenheim presented a different profile. The Guggenheim family controlled copper mining operations across the American West. Benjamin, the fifth of 7 sons, was worth approximately $10 million, but was considered the family's black sheep. He drank heavily, gambled, and maintained multiple mistresses. On Titanic, he traveled with his latest companion, a French singer named Lentine Aubart, and his valet, Victor Giglio. Guggenheim's cabin contained a personal safe. First-class suites included small safes for passengers to secure valuables. Guggenheim's safe held cash, bonds, and jewelry, but also something unusual: mining claims and survey documents from recently purchased properties in Arizona and Colorado. These documents represented ownership of land containing millions of dollars worth of copper ore. If Guggenheim died without those documents reaching New York, his family's ownership could be challenged. Paper documents, in 1912, were often the only proof of property rights. But Guggenheim had another concern. He was returning to America to secure financing for a major mining expansion. He'd spent weeks in London meeting with bankers, negotiating terms for loans totaling several $1 million. Those negotiations had produced signed agreements that Guggenheim carried with him. The agreements were confidential because they involved complex transactions with British banks that were American financial regulations made difficult. If news of these loans became public before Guggenheim could complete the paperwork in New York, his competitors might block the deals. Did Guggenheim carry something beyond documents? His valet later claimed that Guggenheim had other valuable items in a locked trunk stored in the cargo hold. The valet survived Titanic's sinking but refused to specify what those items were, saying only that they were personal matters of Mr. Guggenheim's business. After Guggenheim died in the sinking, famously changing into evening wear and announcing, "We've dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen," his family made no effort to recover cargo from the wreck. Why? Perhaps because they knew that whatever was in that trunk had already been accounted for. Or perhaps because its contents were better left undiscovered. Isidore and Ida. Strauss represented old-fashioned wealth and values. Isidore, at 67, had built Macy's into America's premier department store. He was worth approximately $3 million, modest by Astor's standards but still substantial. The Strausses were returning from a European buy-in trip, having purchased merchandise for Macy's upcoming season. They traveled with samples, contracts, and financial documents related to their purchases. But the Strausses also carried something more personal. Ida wore several pieces of jewelry, including a diamond necklace purchased in Paris worth $40,000. Isidore carried bearer bonds, financial instruments that functioned like cash, payable to whoever possessed them. The bonds totaled approximately $200,000, intended for business transactions in New York. Bearer bonds were risky to transport because they required no identification to cash. If lost or stolen, they were gone forever. Yet wealthy people often carried them because they provided immediate liquidity without involving banks. The Strausses' cabin safe held these items. When Titanic struck the iceberg, Isidore reportedly tried to return to the cabin to retrieve the bonds and Ida's jewelry. He was prevented by crew members organizing evacuation. Both Strausses died in the sinking Ida, refusing to leave her husband. Isidore refusing a lifeboat seat, while women remained aboard. Their bodies were never recovered, nor were their valuables. Macy's never filed insurance claims for the lost bonds, suggesting the Strauss family preferred not to document publicly what Isidore had been carrying. Margaret Brown, later famous as the unsinkable Molly Brown, carried a relatively modest $2 million fortune from her husband's Colorado mining operations. But Molly's luggage included something unusual: gold jewelry and coins she'd purchased in Europe as both investment and fashion items. Gold jewelry was popular among wealthy Americans in 1912 because it retained value regardless of economic conditions. Molly had approximately $5,000 worth of gold items in her cabin, carefully documented because she'd purchased them legally and intended to declare them. To us, Molly survived the sinking. In later years, she gave numerous interviews about Titanic, but she rarely discussed her lost possessions. She filed a modest insurance claim for luggage and clothing, but never mentioned the gold jewelry. Why? Perhaps because she didn't want to appear greedy when so many had died. Or perhaps because she'd already been compensated through unofficial channels. Insurance companies sometimes made private settlements with survivors to avoid public claims that might reveal how much wealth was actually lost. But the most mysterious passenger was Frances Millet, an American artist and journalist traveling in first class. Millet was well connected socially, but not particularly wealthy by millionaire standards. He'd been in Europe working on various art projects and was returning to Washington, D.C., where he served on the Commission of Fine Arts. Millet had friends throughout American political and social circles. including President Taft and Major Archibald Butt, who was also aboard Titanic. Millet's cabin luggage contained personal effects, painting supplies, and correspondence. Nothing unusual. But Millet also had 2 crates in cargo, listed as art supplies and materials. Nobody questioned this. Artists frequently transported canvas, paints, and equipment. But after the sinking, Millet's family received inquiries from unknown parties asking about those crates. What was in them? Where were they located on the ship? Did Millet mention them before departure? The Millet family didn't know. Francis had told them only that he was bringing home work materials. Researchers decades later discovered something interesting. Millet had visited several European museums and private collections in the months before Titanic's voyage. He'd written letters describing opportunities to acquire items of significant historical value at extraordinarily favorable prices. Millet had money problems, his art didn't sell well, and his government salary was modest. If Millet had somehow arranged to purchase valuable artwork or artifacts at discount, intending to resell them in America, he might have kept those items secret to avoid tax issues or questions about how he afforded them. Did Millet's crates contain valuable art? Possibly, but there's another theory. Millet was close to Major Butt, President Taft's military aide. Both men were aboard Titanic, returning from European trips that officially were personal but had mysterious aspects. Millet had spent time in Rome, where he'd met with various American expatriates and European contacts. Some researchers speculate that Millet was gathering intelligence for the US government, using his art credentials as cover. If true, his crates might have contained documents, photographs, or materials related to pre-World War I intelligence gathering. The cargo hold's total value has been estimated variously between $5 million and $50 million in $1,912. The enormous range reflects uncertainty about what was actually aboard. Official manifests listed insured items, but wealthy passengers routinely transported uninsured valuables to avoid documentation. Insurance created paper trails that governments could examine for tax purposes. Better to risk loss than create permanent records. This culture of discretion makes determining Titanic's true cargo nearly impossible. We know certain items existed because survivors mentioned them or families filed claims. But many valuables were never officially documented. They appear only in private letters, diary entries, or oral histories collected decades later. This evidence is fragmentary, contradictory, and often deliberately vague. But there's a pattern. Multiple sources mention special cargo loaded under guard. Several survivors reported seeing unusual activity around the forward cargo hold. Crew members later said they'd been instructed to restrict access to certain areas. All of this suggests something beyond ordinary passenger. Luggage was aboard. The gold theory specifically emerged from several sources. A White Star Line employee in Southampton claimed to have seen gold bars being loaded into crates before departure. He told his family about it, and the story was passed down through generations. A Titanic crew member who survived the sinking wrote a letter in 1913, mentioning valuable metal cargo that the crew knew about but was ordered not to discuss. The letter surfaced in the 1970s in an estate sale, most compellingly. Insurance records show that Lloyd's of London paid out claims for precious metals and specie lost on Titanic. The total payout was never made public, but researchers have estimated it at several £100,000. If that's accurate, it suggests a substantial quantity of gold, silver, or other precious metals was insured. But insured value typically represented only a fraction of total value, particularly for gold shipments that owners preferred keeping private. By April 14th, Titanic had been at sea for 4 days. The ship was performing flawlessly. Passengers were enjoying unprecedented luxury. The first-class dining experience was legendary 10-course meals, the finest wines, impeccable service. Wealthy passengers relaxed into the routine, reading, playing cards, socializing. Their valuables sat secure in cabin safes or deep in the cargo hold. Nobody worried about safety. Titanic was unsinkable, but below the waterline, design flaws waited. Bulkheads that didn't extend high enough. Inadequate lifeboat capacity. No emergency drills. And in the cargo hold, whatever treasures lay there: gold bars, precious jewelry, valuable documents, priceless article of it, sat unguarded now. As the crew focused on maintaining the ship's speed and course, at 11:40 p.m., everything changed. The iceberg struck. Wealthy passengers felt a slight vibration and thought little of it. John Jacob Astor investigated, returning to tell Madeline there was no concern. Benjamin Guggenheim continued his card game. Isidore and Ida Strauss prepared for bed. None of them knew that in 2.5 hours, they and their fortunes would be at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. 11:40 p.m., April 14th, 1912. Look out. Frederick Fleet peered into the darkness from Titanic's crow's nest. The night was moonless, the sea calm as glass. To calm, without waves breaking against icebergs, they were nearly invisible. Fleet saw it suddenly, a massive dark shape looming directly ahead. He rang the warning bell 3 times and grabbed the telephone to the bridge. Iceberg right ahead. First Officer William Murdoch had 37 seconds to react. He ordered hard starboard and signaled the engine room to reverse engines. The ship began turning, agonizingly slowly for something so massive. For a moment, it seemed Titanic might clear the iceberg. Then came the grinding sound. The iceberg scraped along Titanic's starboard side below the waterline, buckling plates and popping rivets across a 300-foot length. Most passengers didn't even wake. The collision was surprisingly gentle, described by survivors as a slight tremor, like the ship running over 1,000 marbles. In first class, several passengers noticed the engine stopping, which was more alarming than the collision itself. Titanic's engines never stopped. They were the heartbeat of the ship. Silence meant something serious had occurred. Thomas Andrews, Titanic's designer, was in his cabin reviewing plans when the collision happened. He immediately went to investigate. Andrews knew every inch of this ship. He'd spent 2 years designing it, months supervising construction. He understood its strengths and, more importantly, its weaknesses. Andrews descended into the ship's lower decks and saw water pouring into the forward compartments. He checked the damage systematically, making notes, calculating. The verdict was catastrophic. 6 compartments were flooding. Titanic was designed to survive with up to 4 compartments flooded. The bulkheads, the watertight walls separating compartments, didn't extend high enough. Water would fill the forward compartments, flow over the bulkheads into the next compartments, pulling the bow down progressively until the entire ship sank. Andrews calculated they had perhaps 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours if they were fortunate. The unsinkable ship was doomed. Captain Smith received Andrews's assessment at 12:05 a.m. 25 minutes after the collision. Smith was 62 years old, making his final voyage before retirement. He'd commanded ships for nearly 4 decades without losing a vessel. Now, on his last trip, commanding the world's most advanced ship, he faced catastrophe. Smith ordered distress rockets fired and the wireless operators to send CQD signals, the universal distress call, later changed to SOS. But Smith faced an impossible dilemma. Titanic carried 2,224 people. The lifeboats had capacity for 1,178. Even if every boat launched fully loaded, which rarely happened in the confusion of evacuation, over 1,000 people would die. Smith knew this within minutes of hearing Andrews's report. He was about to preside over one of history's greatest maritime disasters. In the cargo hold, seawater was rising rapidly. The forward hold, where those mysterious 4 crates sat chained to the deck, flooded first. Water poured through buckled plates with the force of fire hoses. Within 15 minutes, the hold was completely submerged. Whatever those crates contained, gold, documents, valuables, was now under icy seawater and sinking deeper as Titanic's bow tilted downward. The 2 crew members assigned to guard the cargo hold, Frederick Barrett and Arthur Priest, were in the boiler rooms when the collision occurred. They felt the impact more strongly than passengers above. Freezing seawater surged into Boiler Room 6, forcing crew to scramble to higher decks. Barrett and Priest abandoned their guard posts. Saving lives, including their own, took priority over protecting cargo. But someone else went to the cargo hold. A passenger. Multiple survivors later reported seeing a well-dressed man descending toward the forward cargo areas shortly after midnight. The man wasn't panicking like other passengers. He moved with purpose, carrying a flashlight. 2 stewards tried to stop him, saying the area was flooding and off. The man showed them something survivors disagreed on what, with some saying it was a badge or credential, and the stewards let him pass. Who was this man? Some researchers believe it was Major Archibald Butt, President Taft's military aide. Butt's cabin was near the cargo hold access. He had authority most passengers lacked, and if Butt had been supervising valuable cargo during the voyage, he might attempt to assess the damage or salvage something before the area became completely inaccessible. Accounts suggest it might have been John Jacob Astor definitely tried to access restricted areas during the evacuation. Multiple witnesses saw him attempting to reach the first-class luggage storage, presumably to retrieve valuables. Crew members stopped him repeatedly, but Astor was resourceful and determined. If he believed something extremely valuable was in the cargo hold, he might have found a way down. Whoever the mysterious man was, he never came back up. At least, no survivor reported seeing him emerge. Either he drowned in the flooding cargo hold, or he was among the unidentified bodies recovered later. The incident became one of many Titanic mysteries, verifiable stories passed down through survivor accounts, impossible to confirm or deny. By 12:30 a.m., crew members were loading lifeboats. The process was chaotic. Officers enforced women and children first inconsistently. Some boats launched half empty because passengers didn't believe the ship was really sinking. It seemed impossible. Titanic was enormous, solid, brilliantly lit. How could it sink? Many people refused to leave, preferring to stay in the warm, comfortable interior rather than risk dark, cold lifeboats. John Jacob Astor helped his pregnant wife Madeline into lifeboat. For around 1:55 a.m., he asked if he could accompany her, given her condition. Second Officer Charles Lightler refused. Women and children only. Astor accepted the decision calmly. He stepped back, lit a cigarette, and watched the boat descend. Madeline survived. Astor did not. His body was recovered days later, identified by his initials embroidered on his jacket and approximately $2,500 in cash still in his pockets. His other valuables, including the Egyptian antiquities worth hundreds of thousands, went down with the ship. Benjamin Guggenheim and his valet, Victor Giglio, helped load women into lifeboats for over an hour. Around 1:40 a.m., Guggenheim apparently accepted that he wouldn't survive. He and Giglio returned to their cabins and changed into evening wear tuxedos, top hats. They came back on deck impeccably dressed. "We've dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen," Guggenheim told a steward. It was theatrical but genuine. Guggenheim knew he was dying and chose to control how. Neither his nor Giglio's body was recovered. His valuables, including whatever was in that mysterious trunk in cargo, sank with him. Isidore and Ida Strauss faced their own decision. Crew members urged Ida into a lifeboat around 1:40 a.m. She stepped toward it, then stopped. She looked at Isidore. "Where you go, I go," she said. She returned to his side. Crew members offered Isidore a seat, given his age. He refused. While women remained aboard, he wouldn't take a lifeboat spot. The couple sat together on deck chairs and waited. Both died. Their bodies were never found. The bearer bonds worth $200,000 and Ida's diamond necklace sank to the ocean floor. Margaret Molly Brown was one of the fortunate ones. She was loaded into Lifeboat 6, which launched at 12:55 a.m. with only 28 people, despite capacity for 6. The boat was so underfilled that Molly spent the night arguing with the quartermaster about returning to pick up swimmers. They never did. Molly lost her luggage, her gold jewelry, and personal items, but she survived. She became one of Titanic's most famous survivors, though she disliked the unsinkable nickname popularized later. As the ship tilted increasingly bowed down, the remaining passengers and crew faced horror. By 2 a.m., Titanic's stern was rising out of the water. The forward funnel collapsed, crushing dozens. People clung to railings, struggled up the sloping deck, jumped into the freezing ocean. The lights stayed on until the final minutes, engineers heroically maintaining power so people could see. At 2:18 a.m., Titanic's stern rose, perpendicular, nearly vertical. Hundreds of people still aboard clung to whatever they could. Boilers broke loose, crashing through bulkheads. Furniture, cargo, and human beings tumbled forward as the ship became a vertical column. Then, with a sound survivors described as like thunder, Titanic broke in half. The bow section, already flooded, sank immediately. The stern settled back briefly, then followed, pulling hundreds of screaming people under. The section of ship containing the cargo hold sank in approximately 12 minutes. It descended through darkness, pressure increasing exponentially. At 500 feet, sunlight disappeared completely. At 1,000 feet, the pressure was over 400 pounds per square inch. The hull groaned and compressed. Glass windows imploded. Wooden structures crushed. But metal, particularly dense. Heavy metal, like gold, remained intact. The bow section hit bottom at 2:30 a.m., striking the ocean floor at approximately 35 miles per hour. The impact drove the bow 50 feet into mud. The stern followed minutes later, landing 2,000 feet away and disintegrating on impact. Between and around both sections, debris scattered across the ocean floor. Luggage, furniture, personal items, clothing, and somewhere, in that devastation, in the crushed remains of the forward cargo hold, those 4 mysterious crates, 5 tons of gold, were aboard. It was now 12,500 feet underwater, surrounded by wreckage, buried in sediment, in absolute darkness and near freezing temperatures. The pressure at that depth was over 6,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush human bodies instantly, enough to compress organic materials beyond recognition. But gold was indestructible. It wouldn't rust, corrode, or decompose. It would sit there, unchanged, for eternity if necessary. 712 people survived in lifeboats. They waited in darkness for 4 hours, listening to the screams of 1,500 people dying in the freezing water. The screams lasted about 20 minutes before hypothermia silenced them. The RMS Carpathia arrived at 4 a.m., rescuing survivors. The dead floated everywhere. Carpathia recovered only a few dozen bodies. The rest sank or drifted away. John Jacob Astor's body was recovered on April 22nd. Benjamin Guggenheim's was never found. Isidore and Ida Strauss were never found. Major Archibald Butt was never found. Francis Millet was never found. Over 1,000 bodies were never recovered, lost to the ocean or buried in wreckage, and in the cargo hold. Deep in the darkness, whatever secrets Titanic carried gold. Valuables, documents remained undisturbed. The ocean had claimed the greatest ship ever built. It had claimed 1,500 lives. It had claimed fortunes beyond calculation. And it would guard those secrets for 73 years before anyone could return to investigate. But the questions survived. What really sank with Titanic? Was there gold in those crates? If so, whose gold was it? Why was it being transported secretly? And most intriguingly, did someone know the ship would sink? Were certain items placed aboard specifically because they needed to disappear permanently? These questions would haunt researchers for decades. Because Titanic wasn't just a maritime disaster. It was a mystery. A disaster that seemed almost too convenient for people who might benefit from certain valuables disappearing forever. April 18, 1912. The RMS Carpathia docked in New York harbor carrying 712 Titanic survivors. Thousands of people crowded the pier. Families searched desperately for loved ones. Reporters shouted questions. Photographers captured haunted faces emerging from the ship. The disaster had dominated headlines for 4 days. Now, survivors brought first-hand accounts of the horror. But behind the human tragedy, another story was unfolding. A financial story. Within hours of Titanic's sinking, insurance companies began calculating losses. Lloyd's of London, which had insured most of Titanic's cargo and many passengers' valuables, faced claims totaling millions of pounds. White Star Line faced even larger liabilities. The ship itself, passenger claims, cargo claims, wrongful death lawsuits. The financial aftermath would take decades to RESOLVE, J.P. Morgan, whose International Mercantile Marine Company owned White Star Line, was in France when Titanic sank. He'd cancelled his passage on the maiden voyage at the last moment, citing health concerns. When news reached him, Morgan's reaction was reportedly subdued, almost as if he'd expected something, though nobody could prove that. Morgan returned to America immediately, facing questions about why the ship lacked sufficient lifeboats and whether cost-cutting measures had compromised safety. But Morgan faced more specific questions about cargo. Multiple survivors mentioned valuable items lost in the sinking. Families of deceased millionaires were filing claims, and rumors persisted about special cargo that hadn't been publicly documented. Insurance investigators began questioning White Star Line officials about exactly what was in Titanic's cargo hold when the ship left. Southampton, the official cargo manifest, listed 3,364 bags of mail, various food supplies, passenger luggage, and miscellaneous valuables insured for approximately £150,000. That figure seemed suspiciously low for a ship carrying the world's wealthiest passengers. Insurance investigators suspected massive underreporting. Wealthy people routinely declared minimal values to avoid documentation and taxes. But if actual cargo values were much higher, insurance companies needed to know. Their potential liabilities could be enormous. One investigator, a Lloyd's of London assessor named William Crosby, spent weeks interviewing dock workers who'd loaded Titanic. Several workers mentioned unusual cargo loaded before dawn on April 10th, for wooden crates, heavily guarded, brought aboard before regular loading began. The crates were marked only with numbers, no names, no shipping information. Workers weren't told what they contained. They were simply instructed to secure them in the forward cargo hold with extra chains. Crosby interviewed the workers separately. Their stories were consistent. Heavy crates, military-style guards, loaded in darkness, secured with unusual precautions. Crosby estimated the crates' weight based on descriptions, approximately 400 pounds each. That suggested dense contents, not clothing or documents. Something heavy, metal, perhaps. Gold would fit the weight estimates perfectly, but Crosby hit a wall investigating further. White Star Line claimed no record of those crates existed beyond the standard miscellaneous valuables entry. The company suggested workers were misremembering, conflating different cargo loads, or exaggerating for attention. Without documentation, Crosby couldn't prove anything. Lloyd's of London paid out claims based on declared values, not speculation about undocumented cargo. Families of deceased passengers filed hundreds of claims. The largest came from John Jacob Astor's estate. Astor's widow, Madeline, claimed losses totaling over $100,000 jewelry, antiquities, personal items, documents. The claim was carefully documented, listing specific items and their estimated values. Insurance companies paid it without dispute. Astor was wealthy enough that nobody questioned his ability to afford such items, but Astor's estate never mentioned anything in cargo beyond normal luggage. If Astor had items in those mysterious crates, his family didn't claim them. Perhaps they didn't know about them. Perhaps Astor's business affairs included transactions he hadn't shared with family. Or perhaps the estate knew about the items but chose not to claim them, preferring whatever secrets they represented remained buried. Benjamin Guggenheim's family filed more modest claims, approximately $25,000 for personal items and luggage. Again, nothing about special cargo. Guggenheim's valet, Victor Giglio, had mentioned personal business matters in the cargo hold before the voyage. But Giglio died in the sinking. Whatever he knew died with him. The Guggenheim family never investigated further. They had millions. Losing $25,000 worth of belongings was unfortunate, but not devastating. The pattern was consistent. Wealthy families filed claims for items they could document: jewelry, clothing, purchased goods with receipts. Nobody claimed mysterious cargo. Nobody mentioned gold. It was as if that entire aspect of the ship's contents had been erased from official record. Either it never existed, or people who knew about it chose silence. By 1913, attention shifted to legal liability for the disaster itself. Survivors and victims' families filed lawsuits against White Star Line, demanding compensation for deaths and injuries. The legal battle would continue for years. American and British inquiries investigated the sinking, assigning blame, recommending safety improvements. But those inquiries focused on ship design, crew decisions, and safety procedures. They didn't investigate cargo. One person who seemed unusually interested in cargo was Guglielmo Marconi, inventor of the wireless telegraph. Marconi had been scheduled to sail on Titanic but changed his plans last minute, taking an earlier ship. After the disaster, Marconi asked detailed questions about whether wireless equipment in the cargo hold had been damaged. His inquiries seemed to focus on whether anything in the cargo hold might have survived intact. Why would Marconi care about cargo survival unless he knew something valuable was there? Marconi never explained his interest. But researchers later discovered that Marconi had business connections to several passengers, including Major Archibald Butt and Francis Millet. All three men had been in Europe during the same period before Titanic's voyage. All three were scheduled to return on the same ship. Marconi changed plans. The other two died. Coincidence? Or did Marconi know something that made him avoid Titanic? Conspiracy theories began emerging almost immediately. Some claimed Titanic was deliberately sunk as insurance fraud. Though this theory collapsed when investigators proved J.P. Morgan would have lost far more money from the disaster than he could gain from insurance. Others suggested the ship was carrying contraband weapons, intelligence documents, or other illegal cargo that someone wanted destroyed. These theories lacked evidence, but persisted because official explanations seemed incomplete. The gold theory specifically emerged from several sources. In 1914, a British salvage expert named Robert Ballard, no relation to the later Titanic, discoverer, proposed mounting an expedition to recover Titanic's valuables. Ballard claimed to have information about metal cargo of significant value in the forward hold. He never specified his source, but insisted the cargo existed and could be recovered with proper equipment. Ballard's proposal went nowhere. Technology in 1914 couldn't reach Titanic's depth. The wreck lay 12,500 feet down over 2 miles. Submarine technology was primitive. Diving equipment couldn't function at such pressure. Surface ships couldn't precisely locate the wreck without modern navigation technology. Titanic's position was known only approximately somewhere in a several square mile area of Atlantic Ocean. Finding the wreck would require searching vast empty ocean at crushing depth, but Ballard's proposal sparked interest. If a salvage expert believed valuable cargo existed, perhaps the rumors had substance. Other salvage operators began investigating feasibility. All reached the same conclusion. Recovery was impossible with current technology. The wreck would remain untouched for decades, possibly forever. World War I erupted in 1914, ending most Titanic-related activities. The disaster faded from headlines as war dominated attention. Insurance claims were settled. Lawsuits concluded. White Star Line paid compensation to victims' families. The company modified other ships, adding lifeboats and improving safety procedures. But Titanic itself was forgotten, a tragedy eclipsed by the greater tragedy of global war. One person who never forgot was Harold Bride, Titanic's junior wireless operator. Bride survived the sinking and continued working as a telegraph operator. In private correspondence, years later, Bride mentioned that he'd been ordered to maintain wireless silence about certain cargo information. He didn't specify what cargo or who gave the order, but Bride insisted that official accounts don't tell everything about what was aboard. Another survivor, Steward Frederick Dentre, gave an interview in 1928 claiming he'd seen guards posted at the cargo hold during the voyage. Ray said he'd wondered why valuable cargo needed guards when it was locked and sealed. He concluded, "Something extraordinarily valuable must have been aboard." Ray couldn't prove this. He'd been too busy during the sinking to think about cargo, but his account added to accumulating evidence that official records were incomplete. By 1930, Titanic had become legend rather than news. The disaster was 18 years past. Most survivors were elderly. Public interest had faded. The wreck sat undisturbed at the bottom of the Atlantic, crushed by pressure, buried in sediment, home to deep-sea creatures adapted to eternal darkness. If gold was there, it would remain there indefinitely. No technology existed to recover it, but scientific advances were occurring. Submarines could reach increasingly deep depths. Sonar could map ocean floors. In theory, finding and exploring Titanic was becoming possible. It would require enormous resources and technological development, but it wasn't impossible anymore. It was just extremely difficult and expensive. In 1935, a British inventor named Charles Smith proposed using a diving bell to reach Titanic. Smith calculated that a specially designed chamber could withstand the pressure at 12,500 feet. Crew members inside could explore the wreck, recover items, and return safely. Smith sought funding from various sources, claiming that recoverable valuables would pay for the expedition. Many times over, Smith's proposal attracted attention from an unexpected source: the British government. Specifically, the Admiralty, Britain's naval command. Why would the military be interested in salvaging a civilian liner? One theory: intelligence services believed Titanic carried sensitive documents, perhaps correspondence between British and American intelligence services, perhaps documents related to pre-war political tensions. If such documents existed and could be recovered, they might still have intelligence value 23 years later. The Admiralty funded Smith's feasibility study, but ultimately decided the technology wasn't ready. Smith's diving bell design had fatal flaws. The pressure at Titanic's depth would crush any chamber Smith could build with available materials. Recovery would have to wait for better technology. The Admiralty archived the proposal and moved on to other projects. World War II erupted in 1939, again pushing Titanic into obscurity. The ship had now been submerged for 27 years. Survivors were dying. Anyone under age 5 at the time of the sinking was now 32 years old. Direct memory of the disaster was fading. Titanic became a historical event rather than living memory. But interest never completely died. Occasional articles revisited the disaster. Books analyzed what went wrong, and treasure hunters never stopped dreaming about what might lie in the wreck. Gold, jewelry, valuables from the world's wealthiest passengers, all of it sitting in darkness, unclaimed, waiting for whoever developed technology to reach it. By 1950, that technology was close. Deep-sea exploration had advanced significantly during the war. Submarines operated at greater depths. Sonar was more sophisticated. Navigation systems were more accurate. Scientists began talking seriously about locating and exploring Titanic, not just for treasure, but for historical and scientific purposes. The wreck could teach valuable lessons about deep-sea conditions, metal corrosion, and archaeological preservation. But the same question persisted. What would they find? Official records listed minimal cargo, but rumors, survivor accounts, and circumstantial evidence suggested something more was aboard. Perhaps not 5 tons of gold, that might be exaggeration. But something valuable. Something worth the security precautions. Something that powerful people had wanted transported discreetly. Whatever it was, it had been underwater for 38 years. Sitting in darkness, undisturbed, waiting. July 14, 1985. A French research vessel named Le Sarouet sat motionless in the North Atlantic. APPROXIMATELY, 370 miles south-southeast of Newfoundland. For weeks, scientists had been searching the ocean floor with sophisticated sonar equipment, mapping the seabed in a debris field that might contain Titanic's remains. They'd found nothing. Equipment malfunctions, bad weather, and the sheer difficulty of searching 2-mile-deep ocean were defeating them. Dr. Robert Ballard, an oceanographer from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, was leading the American portion of the expedition. Ballard had spent years developing deep-sea exploration technology, remotely operated vehicles, underwater cameras, and precision navigation systems that could operate at crushing depths. But even with advanced equipment, finding Titanic was extraordinarily difficult. The ocean floor at that depth was vast, dark, and featureless. The wreck could be anywhere in a 100-square-mile search area. Ballard's motivation wasn't treasure hunting. He was a scientist interested in deep-sea geology and maritime history. But Ballard knew that locating Titanic would require significant funding. He'd secured support from the U.S. Navy by agreeing to first locate 2 sunken nuclear submarines, USS Thresher and USS Scorpion, using the expedition's equipment. Only after completing that classified military mission could Ballard search for Titanic. The Navy got intelligence about their submarines. Ballard got funding and technology. By late July, Ballard had only 12 days left before the expedition had to end. Weather was deteriorating. Equipment was failing. The French team had departed after their sonar search found nothing. Ballard switched to a different strategy, using the unmanned submersible Argo to photograph the ocean floor continuously, hoping to spot debris from Titanic's breakup and sinking. September 1st, 1985. 1:05 a.m. Jean-Louis Michel, the French expedition leader who'd remained with Ballard's team, was monitoring video feeds from Argo when something appeared on the screen. Not natural geology, not random debris. A perfectly round shape, man-made. Michel shouted for Ballard, who was sleeping after 20 hours of monitoring. Ballard rushed to the control room and saw what Michel had found. A boiler. One of Titanic's massive boilers, lying on the ocean floor, covered in rust but unmistakable. They'd found it. After 73 years, someone had finally located Titanic's grave. Over the following days, Argo photographed the wreck site extensively. The ship had indeed broken in two, just as survivors had described. The bow section sat upright, remarkably preserved, driven 50 feet into sediment by the force of impact. The stern section lay 2,000 feet away, completely destroyed, almost unrecognizable. Between and around both sections, debris covered the ocean floor. Luggage, furniture, dishes, coal from the bunkers. Personal items scattered across a square mile of seabed. Ballard followed strict protocols. He took no artifacts, He treated the site as a memorial to the 1,500 people who'd died. But Ballard's cameras captured everything in detail. The images were haunting. Titanic's bow loomed out of darkness like a ghost. Railings stood intact. The ship's name was still visible on the hull. Windows gaped, emptied. The grand staircase had collapsed, but the basic structure remained, frozen in time. What about the cargo hold? Ballard's initial survey couldn't access it. The forward hold was buried in sediment and crushed by impact. Entering would require excavation and specialized equipment. But even from external examination, Ballard could see that the hold had imploded. The pressure at 12,500 feet was over 6,000 pounds per square inch. Wood had disintegrated. Paper had dissolved. Organic materials were gone. Only metal, ceramics, and glass survived, but gold would survive. Gold was indestructible. If 5 tons of it were in that cargo hold when Titanic sank, it was still there, crushed under debris, buried in mud, but intact. The question was whether anyone could reach it. Ballard's discovery ignited worldwide interest. Suddenly, everyone wanted to explore Titanic. Treasure hunters, filmmakers, scientists, tourist operators. Ballard argued passionately that the wreck should be left undisturbed, protected as a gravesite, but he had no legal authority. Titanic lay in international waters. No country controlled access. Anyone with resources and technology could visit. In 1987, a controversial salvage operation began. A company called RMS Titanic Inc., founded by entrepreneur George Tulloch, obtained salvage rights through French courts. The company argued that recovering artifacts, served historical preservation items left on the ocean floor, would eventually corrode. Better to recover them for museums than let them disintegrate. Critics called it grave robbing. RMS Titanic Inc. made multiple dives to the wreck between 1987 and 2004, recovering thousands of artifacts, dishes, jewelry, clothing, currency, personal items. The company displayed these items in traveling exhibitions, generating revenue from admission fees. The exhibitions were controversial but popular. Millions of people saw actual objects from Titanic, making history tangible. But RMS Titanic Inc. never claimed to have found gold. Their manifests listed coins, jewelry, and other valuables, but no bullion, no bars, no indication that the rumored 5 tons of gold existed. Company officials said they'd searched the cargo hold area extensively. They'd found mail, luggage, and various cargo items. No gold. Did this prove the gold never existed? Not necessarily. The cargo hold was massively damaged and buried. RMS Titanic Inc.'s explorations were limited by technology and time. They couldn't excavate deeply or access all areas. Gold bars, if they existed, might be buried beneath tons of wreckage and sediment. They might be in sections of the hold that hadn't been explored, or they might have scattered during the sinking, lying somewhere in the debris field. One of the divers, a man named John Chatterton, made an intriguing statement in a 1998 interview. Chatterton had participated in multiple Titanic dives, exploring areas other divers couldn't access. He claimed to have seen anomalous metal objects in the forward hold during one dive. The objects were partially buried, and Chatterton couldn't examine them closely before his dive time expired. He described them as rectangular, heavy, and non-corroded, despite decades underwater. That description matched gold bars perfectly. Chatterton wanted to return and investigate further. But before he could, RMS Titanic, Inc. shifted focus to other areas of the wreck. The company was under constant legal and public pressure. Spending time excavating the cargo hold to investigate unconfirmed metal objects wasn't a priority. Chatterton left the company shortly after, frustrated by what he saw as lost opportunities. Another diver, Russian submariner Anatoly Sagalovich, participated in multiple Titanic expeditions between 1991 and 2005. Sagalovich piloted the mere submersibles that could dive to Titanic's depth. He spent more hours on the wreck than anyone else over 50 dives, totaling hundreds of hours of exploration. In a 2003 interview, Sagalovich mentioned finding unexplained, dense objects. During deep excavation work in 1991, the objects were located in the debris field near the bow section, partially buried in sediment. Sagalovich's equipment detected unusual density readings much higher than iron, steel, or brass. Gold's density is 19.3 grams per cubic centimeter, significantly higher than most metals. If the density readings were accurate, the buried objects could be gold, but recovering them would require excavation equipment the expedition didn't have. Sagalovich marked the location and reported it to expedition leaders. No follow-up occurred. Why didn't anyone investigate further? Several factors complicated exploration. First, Titanic was deteriorating rapidly. Bacteria were consuming the ship's iron, creating rusticles, rust formations that looked like icicles. Scientists estimated Titanic might collapse entirely within decades. Salvage operations focused on recovering artifacts before they were destroyed, not on searching for hypothetical treasure. Second, legal battles over salvage rights consumed enormous resources. Multiple parties claimed authority over Titanic. RMS Titanic, Inc. held court-awarded salvage rights, but other companies and individuals contested this. Lawsuits dragged on for years. Nobody wanted to invest in expensive cargo hold excavation when another party might claim ownership of whatever was recovered. Third, public opinion opposed treasure hunting. Titanic survivors and their descendants viewed the wreck as a gravesite. Taking items felt like desecration. Governments and courts increasingly agreed. By 2000, UNESCO and other international bodies were developing protections for Titanic, treating it as underwater cultural heritage rather than salvageable property. But the most intriguing obstacle was secrecy. Multiple divers and scientists who'd explored Titanic hinted at finding things they couldn't discuss publicly. They mentioned restricted information, classified findings, and private agreements that prevented disclosure. Why would scientific exploration of a 73-year-old shipwreck involve secrecy? One theory involved government interest. The U.S. Navy had funded Ballard's initial expedition as cover for locating nuclear submarines. Did the Navy discover something during that mission they wanted kept quiet? Some researchers believe Ballard found evidence of valuable cargo but was ordered to remain silent to prevent treasure hunting frenzy that would interfere with military operations in the area. Another theory involved insurance. Lloyd's of London and other insurers had paid out millions in claims for Titanic cargo. If valuable items were recovered, insurance companies might claim ownership, arguing they'd already paid for them. Salvage operators who found gold might face lawsuits demanding they turn it over to insurers. Better to say nothing than trigger legal battles. The most controversial theory involved the passengers themselves. Multiple wealthy families had relatives die on Titanic. If those relatives had been transporting undocumented valuables, perhaps to evade taxes or hide assets their descendants wouldn't want publicity, discovery of hidden cargo might trigger tax investigations, legal claims from other heirs, or embarrassing questions about family finances. Some researchers believe wealthy families have quietly paid salvage operators to avoid disclosing certain findings. In 1997, James Cameron released the film Titanic, reigniting public fascination. The movie grossed over $2 billion, becoming the highest-grossing film ever at that time. Cameron had made multiple dives to the actual wreck during filming, capturing footage used in the movie. His cameras explored areas that previous expeditions hadn't documented. Cameron claimed his expedition was purely for filmmaking, but he hired scientists and deep-sea explorers who conducted serious research. In press interviews, Cameron mentioned being surprised by how much of the ship remained intact and how much debris covered the ocean floor. He noted that systematic excavation of cargo areas would take years and require equipment that doesn't yet exist. But Cameron also said something intriguing during a 1998 interview. When asked if he'd found anything unexpected during his dives, Cameron paused before answering. "We saw things that raised questions," he said carefully. "But those questions belong to historians and archaeologists, not filmmakers." He refused to elaborate. That cryptic statement fueled speculation that Cameron's team had found something significant, but chose not to make it public. By 2000, Titanic had been explored by dozens of expeditions. Thousands of artifacts had been recovered. The ship's structure was thoroughly documented. Scientists understood the wreck's condition and deterioration rate. Yet fundamental questions remained unanswered. What exactly was in the cargo hold when Titanic sank? Were valuables beyond what official manifests listed? Did secret cargo exist? Most importantly, was there gold? 5 tons, as rumors claimed, some lesser amount, or none at all. The evidence was contradictory. No confirmed gold bars had been recovered, but multiple divers reported anomalous, dense objects. Survivor accounts mentioned special cargo. Historical records showed suspicious gaps. Something didn't add up. Either the gold never existed and rumors were simply rumors, or it was still down there, buried, waiting for the right technology, the right opportunity, the right moment when someone could finally excavate deep, enough to reach the forward cargo hold's darkest corners and discover what, if anything, lay hidden there. The lack of confirmed gold discoveries, despite decades of exploration, fueled conspiracy theories. If no gold was found, perhaps none existed. But believers asked a different question. If gold was found, would the truth be made public? Or would powerful interests ensure the discovery remained secret? The more researchers investigated, the more they discovered reasons why someone might want Titanic's cargo kept hidden. The insurance fraud theory emerged in the 1990s, promoted by researcher Robin Gardner in his controversial book, Titanic, The Ship That Never Sank. Gardner proposed an extraordinary conspiracy. White Star Line had deliberately sunk the ship as an insurance scam. Not Titanic, actually, but its sister ship Olympic, damaged in a 1911 collision. According to Gardner, White Star Line couldn't afford Olympic's repairs. So they switched the ships, sent the damaged Olympic out as Titanic deliberately sank it, and collected insurance money. The theory was sensational but deeply flawed. Physical evidence contradicted it. The wreck on the ocean floor was definitely Titanic, not Olympic. The ships had different hull markings, window configurations, and construction details. Marine architects easily identified the wreck as Titanic, but one aspect of Gardner's theory deserved serious consideration: the insurance question. White Star Line insured Titanic for £1 million, approximately $5 million in 1912, or $150 million today. That seems like enormous money, but the ship cost £1.5 million to build. White Star Line was under. If the company deliberately sank the ship, they would lose money, not profit. The insurance fraud theory collapsed under financial scrutiny. But what about cargo insurance? That was separate from the ship's insurance. Cargo belonged to shippers and passengers, not White Star Line. If valuable cargo was lost, insurers paid cargo owners, not the shipping company. Lloyd's of London and other insurers paid out approximately £200,000 in cargo claims, substantial but not extraordinary for a ship carrying wealthy passengers. However, insurance investigators in 1912 suspected massive underreporting. Wealthy people declared minimal cargo values to avoid taxes and documentation. If actual cargo was worth far more than declared values, insurers paid only a fraction of true losses. This benefited insurers but created opportunities for fraud in the opposite direction. What if someone insured cargo for inflated values, then arranged for it to be lost in a sinking? This variation of the fraud theory seemed more plausible. Imagine a scenario: a wealthy individual needs to hide assets, perhaps to avoid taxes, creditors, or legal judgments. He purchases gold anonymous, untraceable. He arranges to ship it secretly on Titanic, insuring it for less than full value to avoid suspicion. The ship sinks. He claims insurance for the declared value, which insurers pay without question, since the cargo demonstrably sank. Meanwhile, the gold is actually still in his possession, never having been placed on the ship. He's converted traceable wealth into untraceable gold, plus an insurance payout. Did anyone do this? Impossible to prove, but suspicious circumstances existed. Several wealthy Titanic passengers faced financial problems in 1912. John Jacob Astor was involved in messy divorce settlements and real estate disputes. Benjamin Guggenheim had gambling debts. Isidor Straus faced business challenges from competitors. If any of them used Titanic's sinking to hide assets, they took that secret to their graves. A more sinister theory involved government conspiracy. This theory suggested that valuable cargo on Titanic wasn't private wealth but government properties, specifically gold being transported for geopolitical reasons. In 1912, European powers were positioning themselves for what would become World War I. Gold movements between countries could fund military preparations, bribe allies, or destabilize rivals' currencies. Researcher Charles Pellegrino investigated this theory extensively. Pellegrino discovered that in early 1912, unusual gold transfers occurred between British and American banks. The transfers were documented in financial records, but their purpose wasn't explained. Standard commercial transactions would be clearly labeled. These transfers were vague, described only as monetary adjustments or precious metal reallocations. Pellegrino theorized that British intelligence was secretly moving gold to America to secure American financial support if war began. Britain knew it would need American loans and supplies. Pre-positioning gold in American banks would facilitate those transactions. But the gold movements needed to be secret. If Germany learned that Britain was preparing for war by securing American financing, it might attack preemptively. Could Titanic have carried government gold? The ship's security measures suggested possible official cargo. Guards posted at the cargo hold. Restricted access. Crew members ordered to maintain silence about certain shipments. These precautions exceeded normal commercial shipping protocols. They resembled military security measures. Major Archibald Butt's presence on Titanic supported this theory. Butt was President Taft's military aide. He'd spent months in Europe on diplomatic missions. If the US government was secretly collaborating with Britain on financial preparations for war, Butt would be involved. His presence on Titanic might have been coincidence, or he might have been escorting government cargo, but Butt died in the sinking. If he was protecting valuable cargo, that mission failed, unless failure was the point. This theory proposed the darkest conspiracy. Titanic was deliberately sunk to destroy evidence. Perhaps the gold shipment violated international agreements. Perhaps it represented illegal cooperation between governments that needed to be denied. Sinking the ship eliminated the evidence. Butt's death ensured he couldn't testify about what he knew. This theory required belief that someone would kill 1,500 people to hide a financial transaction. Most researchers found that implausible, but proponents pointed to historical precedents. Governments had done worse things to conceal secrets. World War I would kill millions within 2 years of Titanic's sinking. In that context, sacrificing one ship seemed almost reasonable to people pursuing geopolitical goals. The Templar theory, inevitable given any treasure mystery, suggested Titanic carried artifacts or documents related to the Knights Templar. Proponents noted that several passengers had European aristocratic connections. Francis Millet had spent time in Rome, a city with extensive Templar history. Some researchers claimed Millet was part of a secret society attempting to recover Templar treasures hidden for 6 centuries. This theory strained credibility but revealed something interesting. Multiple passengers had connections to historical research, antiquities, and secret societies. John Jacob Astor collected Egyptian artifacts. Millet studied medieval history. Benjamin Guggenheim's family collected art. If someone wanted to transport historically significant items secretly, Titanic provided perfect cover. Who would question wealthy collectors bringing home European purchases? The art smuggling theory proposed that Titanic carried valuable paintings or artifacts being smuggled from Europe to America. In 1912, US customs duties on artwork were substantial. Wealthy collectors routinely evaded taxes by mislabeling shipments or bribing officials. If someone was smuggling particularly valuable items, old master paintings, ancient sculptures, rare manuscripts, they would arrange transport with maximum security and minimum documentation. European museums and churches had questionable provenance for many items in 1912. Artifacts stolen during Napoleon's campaigns, items purchased from impoverished aristocrats, pieces acquired through colonial exploitation. If someone wanted to quietly move such items to America, they would avoid official channels. Shipping them as anonymous cargo on a luxury liner would be ideal. After Titanic sank, several European art dealers made inquiries about lost shipments. These inquiries were handled privately through insurance companies. No public records documented what items were being claimed or why they'd been on Titanic. This secrecy suggested something improper. Either the items were stolen, their value was being inflated for insurance fraud, or they had other problems requiring discretion. One particularly intriguing claim came from an Italian art dealer named Vittorio Prato. In 1913, Prato contacted Lloyd's of London claiming that paintings worth £50,000 had been lost on Titanic. Prato provided no documentation, no bills of sale, no shipping manifests, no authentication certificates. Lloyd's rejected the claim. Prato sued. The case was settled privately in 1915. Terms of the settlement were sealed. What was Prato claiming? Did the paintings exist? If so, why were they undocumented? The pharmaceutical theory suggested Titanic carried experimental drugs or medical supplies being transported for research purposes. In 1912, pharmaceutical regulation was minimal. Dangerous or controversial substances could be shipped with few questions. If someone was transporting opium, cocaine, or experimental compounds, they would use secure shipping methods. The wealthy. Passengers aboard Titanic included several with pharmaceutical connections. Benjamin Guggenheim's family had investments in chemical companies. John Jacob Astor funded various scientific research projects. If either man was transporting medical materials, they wouldn't advertise it. Medical research in 1912 often involved substances that later became controlled or illegal. Morphine, heroin, and cocaine were legal but controversial. More exotic compounds might be completely unregulated but socially unacceptable. This theory explained the armed guards. Pharmaceutical cargo, especially opiates or experimental drugs, would require security. It also explained the secrecy. Even legal pharmaceutical shipments might embarrass wealthy passengers if made public. Nobody wanted headlines reading "Millionaire ships opium on Titanic." The weapons smuggling theory proposed that Titanic carried arms being shipped illegally. In 1912, various revolutionary movements operated across Europe and America. Irish Republicans, Russian anarchists, labor radicals sought weapons for their causes. If someone was smuggling rifles, ammunition, or explosives from European sources to American destinations, Titanic offered plausible cover. This theory had surprising evidence. Several passengers had connections to political movements. Margaret Brown supported labor causes. Francis Millet knew European anarchists through his artistic connections. If weapons were aboard, they would be hidden in cargo, not announced publicly. After the sinking, nobody would admit to shipping illegal arms. The secret would die with the ship. But the simplest explanation remained. Titanic carried exactly what manifests listed, nothing more. The security measures were standard for valuable cargo. The mysterious crates contained jewelry, bonds, or other ordinary valuables. The rumors about gold were exaggerations, born from the natural human tendency to believe conspiracies over mundane reality. Yet mundane reality had problems. Multiple witnesses described cargo that official records didn't acknowledge. Insurance payouts exceeded what should have been necessary based on declared cargo. Government officials showed suspicious interest in salvage operations. Scientists and divers hinted at discoveries they couldn't discuss publicly. Wealthy families seemed unconcerned about recovering lost valuables. All these anomalies suggested something beyond standard shipping procedures. Perhaps not a vast conspiracy, perhaps just wealthy people and governments doing what they'd always done, moving valuable items secretly to avoid taxes, regulations, and public scrutiny. Nothing sinister, just pragmatic people protecting their interests. But the gold question persisted. 5 tons. The rumor was specific. Not some gold or valuable cargo. 5 tons. Approximately £11,000. At 1912 gold prices, worth about £1 million. At today's prices, worth over $350 million. That specific number came from somewhere. Either someone had actual knowledge, or someone created a very detailed lie. The source of the 5-ton claim has never been definitively identified. It appeared in a 1913 newspaper article about Titanic salvage possibilities. The article cited shipping sources who preferred anonymity. Those sources claimed that as much as 5 tons of gold bullion might have been aboard. The article was reprinted in other papers. The number became fixed in popular imagination. But who were these shipping sources? Why were they anonymous? What was their actual knowledge? The article provided no details. It simply stated the claim as if it were established fact. Researchers have never located the original source. It's possible someone with genuine knowledge leaked the information. It's equally possible someone speculated irresponsibly and newspapers reported speculation as fact. By 2000, the conspiracy theories had multiplied beyond control. Every Titanic book presented new theories. Every documentary explored different conspiracies. The truth, if it existed, was buried under layers of speculation, rumor, and deliberate misinformation. Finding answers required going back to the source, back to the wreck, back to the cargo hold, back to physical evidence that couldn't lie, couldn't exaggerate, couldn't conspire. The truth was down there, 12,500 feet below the surface. The question was whether anyone would ever dig deep enough to find it. August 1996. A salvage vessel named Nader sat above Titanic's wreck site. Lowering a sophisticated, remotely operated vehicle called Robin, RMS Titanic, Inc., was conducting its most ambitious expedition yet attempting to recover a 20-ton section of Titanic's hull. The operation would demonstrate salvage capability and, more importantly, allow unprecedented access to interior spaces that had been sealed since 1912. But while public attention focused on the hull section recovery, a smaller team was working on a different project. 3 technicians operated a specialized excavation ROV designed to dig through sediment in the debris field. Their target was the forward cargo hold area, specifically the location where those 4 mysterious crates had allegedly been stored. After years of planning, RMS Titanic Inc. was finally investigating the gold rumors seriously. The excavation was challenging. Sediment at Titanic's depth was composed of fine silt mixed with disintegrated organic matter. Disturbing, it created clouds that destroyed visibility for hours. The ROV's manipulator arms could dig carefully, but any aggressive movement would blind the cameras. Progress was measured in inches per day, not feet. The team worked in shifts, 24 hours a day, for 3 weeks. What they found was disappointing and intriguing in equal measure. The cargo hold had indeed imploded during the sinking. The impact with the ocean floor had driven the bow section 50 feet into sediment. The forward hold was crushed, filled with mud, and buried under collapsed decking. Accessing it required removing tons of wreckage and excavating through hardened sediment. The team managed to clear a small area approximately 50 feet squared to a depth of about 8 feet. In that small excavation, they found remnants of cargo, leather goods completely preserved by the cold, oxygen-poor environment, bottles of wine, unbroken, labels still legible, pieces of luggage, crushed flat but identifiable, and metal objects. Lots of metal, brass fittings, copper pipes, lead weights, but no gold. Nothing resembling bullion bars. Nothing matching the description of 4 heavy wooden crates. The team leader, a salvage expert named Paul Henry Nargeolet, examined the findings carefully. Nargeolet, a former French Navy commander, had made over 30 dives to Titanic. He understood the wreck's layout better than almost anyone living. Nargeolet concluded that the excavation hadn't reached the original deck level where crates would have been secured. They'd dug through collapsed debris, but not to the actual cargo storage area. "We scratched the surface," Nargeolet told the expedition director. "If something was secured to the deck with chains, it's still down there, under another 10 or 15 feet of wreckage. We'd need to clear the entire area, remove collapsed bulkheads, excavate systems. That would take months, maybe years, and we don't have that time." The expedition ended without resolving the gold question. RMS Titanic Inc. published findings about other recoveries but said little about the cargo hold excavation. Company officials noted that they'd investigated areas of interest and found various cargo items but provided no details about what was sought or why the excavation was conducted. This silence fueled speculation. If nothing was found, why not say so clearly? If something was found, why keep it secret? Conspiracy theorists claimed the company had discovered gold but was hiding it to avoid legal complications. RMS Titanic Inc. insisted nothing significant was found, but the vagueness invited doubt. In 2000, another expedition approached the cargo hold mystery differently. A team led by filmmaker James Cameron and deep-sea expert Anatoly Sagalovich used Russian Mir submersibles to explore areas too dangerous for ROVs. The Mir subs could position precisely, operate in strong currents, and access tight spaces. Cameron wanted footage for a documentary about Titanic's final hours. Sagalovich wanted scientific data about the wreck's deterioration, but both men were also curious about the gold rumors. During planning meetings, Cameron asked Sagalovich directly, "Is there any possibility that gold bars are still accessible?" Sagalovich, who'd made over 50 dives to Titanic, gave a complicated answer. "Possible, yes. Probable, no. Likely to be found, extremely unlikely. The cargo hold is a tomb. Entering it risks collapse. Any serious excavation might destroy evidence rather than reveal it." Despite Sagalovich's caution, the team conducted limited exploration of the forward sections. They used the Mir's manipulator arms to probe sediment near the cargo hold, looking for anomalies. Metal detectors aboard the sub could identify dense objects buried in mud. The team marked several locations where sensors detected unusual density, readings higher than expected for iron or steel. These locations were documented with GPS coordinates and sonar mapping. But Cameron's expedition had neither time nor authorization for excavation. They were there to film, not salvage. The density anomalies remained unexplored, marked for potential future investigation. Cameron mentioned them briefly in his 2003 documentary Ghosts of the Abyss, noting that many mysteries remain buried in Titanic's wreckage, possibly including valuables that passengers and crew thought were secure. That statement was as close as any major expedition came to acknowledging possible gold. Cameron had resources to investigate further, but chose not to. When asked why, he explained, "Titanic is a gravesite. 1,500 people died there. Treating it like a treasure hunt feels disrespectful. If gold exists, it's been there 90 years. It can stay there. Some things are more important than treasure." Not everyone shared Cameron's ethics. In 2001, a private salvage company called Deep Ocean Expeditions began offering paying tourists the chance to dive to Titanic in Russian submersibles. For $36,000, adventurous millionaires could descend to the wreck and see it personally. The expeditions were controversial. Critics called them ghoulish tourism, but they were legal. Titanic sat in international waters. No law prevented tourist visits. Deep ocean expeditions made. Approximately tourist dives between 2001 and 2005. Each dive lasted about 12 hours and a half hours descending, 6 hours on the wreck, 2.5 hours ascending. Tourists could observe but not touch. Removing artifacts was prohibited. Theoretically, these were observation-only visits. But monitoring what happened at 12,500 feet was impossible. If someone recovered small, valuable items, nobody would know. Rumors circulated that certain tourists were actually treasure hunters conducting reconnaissance. Several participants had connections to salvage companies or mining operations. One Russian billionaire made 3 separate dives, each time examining the same area of the debris field near the bow section. When questioned, he claimed simple fascination with the wreck, but observers noted he spent unusual time photographing specific locations and taking sediment samples with the sub's manipulator arms. Did anyone recover artifacts illegally? No proof existed, but suspicious circumstances were noted. In 2004, a small gold ring appeared at a European auction, allegedly from Titanic. The seller claimed it had been recovered legally decades earlier from a body. Authentication was impossible. Titanic's bodies were buried at sea or in cemeteries. None were known to have retained jewelry until 2004. The ring might have been from Titanic, or it might have been stolen from the wreck during a tourist dive. RMS Titanic Inc. attempted to maintain control over the wreck site through legal claims of exclusive salvage rights, but enforcement was impossible. The company couldn't monitor the site constantly. They couldn't prevent other vessels from visiting. International maritime law was ambiguous about ownership of shipwrecks in international waters. Multiple legal jurisdictions claimed authority: American courts, French courts, international maritime tribunals. The situation was a legal nightmare. In 2010, a U.S. federal court awarded RMS Titanic Inc. permanent salvage possession rights over Titanic. This meant the company couldn't sell recovered artifacts for profit, but could display them and charge admission. The ruling was designed to protect the wreck from commercial exploitation while allowing historical preservation, but it didn't prevent others from visiting or attempting recovery. The same year, billionaire entrepreneur Stockton Rush founded OceanGate, a company developing affordable deep-sea submersibles. Rush believed existing technology was too expensive, limiting ocean exploration to governments and wealthy organizations. He wanted to democratize deep-sea access, making it affordable for researchers, filmmakers, and tourists. Rush's ambitions included regular Titanic expeditions. OceanGate developed a carbon fiber submersible called Titan, designed to reach Titanic's depth repeatedly at lower cost than traditional titanium subs. The sub could carry 5 people, pilot and 4 passengers or researchers. By 2017, OceanGate was offering Titanic expeditions for $125,000 per person, significantly cheaper than previous tourist dives. The company promoted the expeditions as citizen science, claiming participants would contribute to ongoing Titanic research, but safety concerns emerged. Marine engineers questioned Titan's carbon fiber construction. Traditional deep-sea submersibles used titanium spheres, extensively tested and certified. Carbon fiber was lighter and cheaper, but less proven at extreme depths. Several industry experts refused to certify Titan, warning that the design might not withstand repeated pressure cycling Rush dismissed these concerns as overly cautious. He believed innovation required risk-taking. Between 2021 and 2023, OceanGate conducted multiple Titanic expeditions. Participants included researchers, filmmakers, and wealthy adventurers. Each expedition spent several days diving to the wreck, documenting its condition and searching for artifacts. On June 18, 2023, Titan began its descent to Titanic with 5 people aboard, including Stockton Rush himself and deep-sea expert Paul Henry Nutt, the same man who'd led the 1996 cargo hold excavation. Communication with the surface ship was lost about 1 hour and 45 minutes into the descent. Titan never reached the wreck. The sub imploded catastrophically at approximately 9,000 feet depth, killing all 5 occupants instantly. The tragedy shocked the deep-sea exploration community. Investigations revealed that Titan's carbon fiber hull had failed due to repeated pressure, cycling exactly what engineers had warned about. The disaster raised questions about commercial deep-sea tourism and whether profit motives were compromising safety. OceanGate ceased operations immediately. The era of affordable Titanic tourism ended as suddenly as it had begun. Nargeolet's death was particularly tragic. He'd devoted decades to Titanic research, conducting more dives than almost anyone. He'd been one of the few people actively investigating the gold rumors, using his dives to map areas where valuables might be located. Nargeolet had planned to publish findings about his cargo hold investigations after retirement. Those findings died with him by 2023. Over 100 years after Titanic sank, the wreck was rapidly deteriorating. Bacteria were consuming the ship's iron structure. Scientists estimated the hull might collapse entirely within the next 20 years. The grand staircase had already disintegrated. The bridge was collapsing. Eventually, Titanic would be nothing but a rust stain on the ocean floor. Any secrets it held would become inaccessible forever. This deterioration created urgency for salvage operations. If gold existed in the cargo hold, time was running out to recover it. But political and ethical opposition to treasure hunting had strengthened. UNESCO designated Titanic as underwater cultural heritage, though enforcement remained problematic. The wreck existed in legal limbo, protected by international agreement but situated beyond any nation's jurisdiction. Several salvage companies quietly developed plans for cargo hold excavation. They worked through international legal channels, seeking permissions from courts and heritage organizations. The companies argued that recovering valuables before the wreck collapsed served historical preservation. Critics countered that treasure hunting was grave robbing regardless of legal justification. As of 2024, no expedition has definitively excavated the forward cargo hold to its original deck level. The area where those 4 mysterious crates were allegedly stored remains buried under tons of wreckage and sediment. If gold is there, it's still there, sitting in darkness, undisturbed, waiting for technology, legal permission, or sheer determination to finally reveal whether the rumors of Titanic's lost gold have any basis in reality. The question must be asked directly: was there 5 tons of gold aboard Titanic? After decades of research, expeditions, salvage operations, and conspiracy theories, what does the evidence actually prove? The answer is complicated, unsatisfying, and perhaps more interesting than simple confirmation or denial would be. Start with what we know for certain. Titanic's official cargo manifest listed miscellaneous valuables insured for £150,000. That's documented fact. Verified through White Star Line records, and insurance company archives. At 1912 values, £150,000 could represent a substantial quantity of gold, perhaps 1 to 2 tons, depending on whether the gold was refined bars or coin. But miscellaneous valuables could also mean jewelry, bonds, currency, or any combination of valuable items. The manifest doesn't specify. We also know that wealthy passengers carried enormous wealth aboard. John Jacob Astor was worth $87 million. Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, Margaret Brown, and others represented combined fortunes exceeding $500 million. These people traveled with valuables, jewelry, documents, collectibles. Insurance claims after the sinking totaled approximately £400,000, suggesting actual losses far exceeded insured amounts. Since wealthy people routinely underinsured to avoid documentation, but personal belongings differ from cargo. Gold bullion in the cargo hold would be commercial shipment, requiring different manifests and security. Did such shipment exist? Here the evidence becomes circumstantial. Multiple dock workers in Southampton reported seeing unusually heavy crates loaded before dawn on April 10, 1912. Their accounts, collected independently by insurance investigator William Crosby in 1912 and 1913, were remarkably consistent. For crates, armed guards, secret loading, unusual security precautions. Captain Edward Smith personally assigned crew members to guard the cargo hold during the voyage. This wasn't standard procedure. Valuable cargo was locked and sealed. Guards were unnecessary unless something extraordinary required protection. Smith's decision suggests he knew about special cargo and considered it important, enough to require human security beyond locked doors. Thomas Andrews, Titanic's designer, made notes about cargo weight distribution that mentioned unusual density forward hold starboard. Andrews was obsessive about weight balance. If cargo in that location was unusually dense, it wasn't ordinary luggage or mail. Dense cargo means metal, and among metals, gold is exceptionally dense, 19.3 grams per cubic centimeter, compared to iron's 7.9 or copper's 9.0. These facts establish that something unusual was in Titanic's forward cargo hold. Something heavy, something requiring security, something important enough that the ship's captain and designer paid special attention to it. Does this prove gold? No, but it proves something beyond ordinary cargo existed. Now consider the salvage findings. RMS Titanic Inc. spent years exploring the wreck and recovered thousands of artifacts. They found jewelry, currency, personal items, exactly what you'd expect from passenger luggage. But they never announced finding gold bars. Does this prove gold wasn't aboard? No, the cargo hold remains largely inaccessible, buried under collapsed decking and tons of sediment. RMS Titanic Inc's excavations were limited, reaching only the uppermost layers of debris. Multiple divers reported anomalous density readings in the forward cargo area. John Chatterton in 1998, Anatoly Segalovich in 1991 and 2003, Paul Henry Nargeolet in 1996 and subsequent expeditions. These were experienced professionals using sophisticated equipment. They weren't treasure hunters seeing what they wanted to see. They were scientists detecting unusual metal signatures in areas consistent with cargo. Storage locations. But detecting density anomalies isn't the same as confirming gold. The anomalies could be brass fittings, lead weights, concentrated iron debris. Without excavation and visual confirmation, they remain unidentified. The tragic 2023 Titan implosion that killed Nargeolet meant losing the person most knowledgeable about these locations and most likely to investigate them seriously. So what's the truth? Based on available evidence, here's the most likely scenario. Titanic carried valuable cargo beyond what official manifests documented. This cargo included precious metals, possibly gold, possibly silver, possibly both. The quantity was substantial enough to require special security, but probably not 5 tons. The 5-ton claim appears to be exaggeration, either from misunderstanding or deliberate inflation. The cargo most likely belonged to private parties, wealthy individuals, or banking institutions moving assets discreetly to avoid taxes or documentation. In 1912, gold movements could affect currency markets. People with large gold holdings preferred secrecy. Shipping gold as anonymous cargo on a luxury liner was perfect. Nobody would question wealthy passengers bringing valuable items aboard. The cargo would reach New York without customs scrutiny or public attention. When Titanic sank, this cargo was lost, but owners couldn't publicly claim it without admitting they'd been evading documentation. Insurance companies suspected significant underreporting but couldn't prove it. Wealthy families filed claims for items they could document: jewelry, purchased goods, but not for undocumented gold shipments. The gold, if it existed, became a loss that nobody could officially acknowledge. Over decades, the story transformed into legend. Substantial gold became tons of gold, became 5 tons of gold. Each retelling added details. The legend became more specific and more dramatic. By the time serious salvage operations began in the 1980s, the 5-ton claim was treated as established fact by treasure hunters, even though no primary source confirmed that specific number. But something is down there. The evidence is too consistent to dismiss entirely. Dock workers' accounts, security measures, Andrews' notes, Smith's concerns, density anomalies detected by multiple independent divers. All of this points to valuable metal cargo in the forward hold. The question isn't whether something was there. The question is what, how much, and whether it remains recoverable after 112 years underwater. Gold is indestructible. It doesn't rust, corrode, or decompose. If gold bars were secured in the cargo hold when Titanic sank, they're still there. They might be buried under 50 feet of collapsed wreckage and sediment. They might be scattered across the debris field if their crates broke during the sinking. They might be completely inaccessible without excavating the entire forward section. But the gold itself, if it existed, is intact. The tragedy is that we'll probably never know for certain. Titanic is deteriorating rapidly. Bacterial action is consuming the iron hull at accelerating rates. Scientists estimate the ship has 20 years before structural collapse makes exploration impossible. But political and ethical opposition to salvage operations has intensified. UNESCO protections, though not enforceable, create international pressure against treasure hunting. Courts increasingly ruled that Titanic should be left undisturbed, even if someone obtained permission to excavate the cargo hold properly. The cost would be enormous. Specialized equipment, months of work, expert crews, security, legal fees. The total investment would exceed $50 million easily. Without certainty about what would be recovered, no company could justify the expense. Investors want guaranteed returns. Titanic offers only possibilities. The Ocean Gate disaster demonstrated another barrier. Safety. Deep sea exploration at Titanic's depth remains extremely dangerous. Every dive risks equipment failure and death. After 5 people died in Titan's implosion, regulatory scrutiny increased. Future expeditions will face stricter safety requirements, making operations more expensive and complex. The era of relatively accessible Titanic exploration has ended, so Titanic's treasure, whatever it is, will likely remain where it sank. Not because recovering it is impossible, but because political, ethical, financial, and technical obstacles have become insurmountable. The ship will deteriorate into unrecognizable wreckage. The cargo hold will collapse. Whatever secrets it held will be buried forever under rust and sediment. But maybe that's appropriate. Titanic is more than a shipwreck. It's a memorial to 1,500 people who died in one of history's greatest maritime disasters. Treating it as a treasure trove feels disrespectful to their memory. The survivors who escaped that night didn't care about gold or valuables. They cared about survival, about lost loved ones, about the trauma they'd experienced. In that context, whether 5 tons of gold sits at the bottom of the Atlantic seems trivially unimportant. Yet the question persists because it represents something beyond mere treasure hunting. It represents the human drive to solve mysteries, to find answers, to know the truth. Titanic has become legend, and legends require mysteries. The lost gold isn't just about money. It's about what was really happening in 1912, behind the public narrative of luxury and progress. It's about secrets that powerful people wanted kept hidden. It's about the gap between official history and actual events. Perhaps the real treasure of Titanic isn't gold. It's the questions the ship forces us to ask. About wealth and inequality as ship, where some passengers traveled in unimaginable luxury while others were crammed in steerage. About technology and hubris, the unsinkable ship that sank on its maiden voyage. About class and survival, the fact that first-class passengers survived at much higher rates than third-class passengers. These questions remain relevant today. We still have massive wealth inequality. We still build technologies we claim are foolproof. We still live in societies where some lives are valued more than others. Titanic is a mirror reflecting our own world's problems. The ship sank 112 years ago, but the issues it represents never went away. As for the gold, here's what seems most likely. Something valuable was in that cargo hold. Not 5 tons, probably less, perhaps much less, but something that people in 1912 thought was worth protecting with extraordinary security measures. That something is still there, buried in darkness, inaccessible but intact. It might be recovered someday if technology advances and political opposition softens. More likely, it will remain buried until Titanic collapses completely and becomes indistinguishable from the ocean floor. And maybe that's the treasure's final lesson. Some things aren't meant to be found. Some secrets should remain secret. Some mysteries should stay unsolved. Not because the answers aren't important, but because the search itself, the wondering, the theorizing, the imagining's more valuable than any answer could be. Titanic lies in darkness, 12,500 feet beneath the Atlantic Ocean. The ship that was supposed to be unsinkable, the voyage that was supposed to be triumphant, the treasure that may or may not have been real. Everything that was bright and new in 1912 is now dark and old. Everything that was certain is now questioned. Everything that was known is now mysterious. And perhaps, in the end, that's exactly as it should be. Because Titanic teaches us that certainty is an illusion, that the unsinkable can sink, that the definite can become indefinite, that what we think we know may not be true. The ship went down with its secrets. It's kept those secrets for over a century. It will probably keep them forever. The treasure, if it exists, has found its eternal hiding place, not in a vault or a museum or a collector's safe, but in the deepest part of the ocean, in absolute darkness, in crushing pressure, in freezing cold, protected not by guards or locks or security systems, but by the simple fact that reaching it requires more effort, expense, and risk than anyone is willing to invest. So the question remains unanswered. Was there 5 tons of gold aboard Titanic? And perhaps the answer is this: it doesn't matter. The real treasure isn't gold. It's the story. It's the mystery. It's the lesson that some things are more valuable than money. It's the reminder that the greatest disasters often hide the greatest secrets. It's the understanding that history is more complex than we're usually told, and that treasure, the story of Titanic and all its mysteries, that treasure belongs to everyone. You don't need millions of dollars to access it. You don't need deep-sea submersibles. You just need curiosity and imagination. The treasure is the question itself, and that treasure will never sink. It will never rust. It will never deteriorate. It will last as long as people remember Titanic and wonder what really happened on that cold April night in 1912.